Great to see you. Welcome to everyone. This is the Leaders in Neurosurgery series, and I've got the great delight today of interviewing Dr. Jim Rutka, who is, I think, lacking in need of an introduction. I will give one of my conflict of interest, Jim, which is that you've been a dear friend and have been and remain a mentor to me. And obviously that biases everything that I will ask of you for the next half an hour or so. But thanks so much for agreeing to this and to agreeing to spend the time like this.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sunit. And I can't think of anyone I'd rather be interviewed by than you, given how long we've known each other and our friendship that dates back a couple of decades. So really, it's fantastic. So thank you, and fire ahead.
Oh, great. Well, Jim, so, you know, you're a native Torontonian. You grew up here. I wonder if you could tell us just a little bit about your path through early adulthood and how it is that you found yourself moving toward neurosurgery.
Yeah, so at the end of high school, Sunit, I was very interested in going to a university that would enable me to do the scholastics, but also at that time I was actually involved in a lot of sports in school, and so I wanted to have the best chance to do the academic programs and also do sports. I know you're a basketball player, and that's something that you've, I'm sure, looked at very carefully in terms of schools that you went to, but it didn't appear to me at that time that the best combination was going to take place for me in Canada. So I ended up looking at a number of options in the United States after high school, and I landed at one of the Ivy League schools. So I went to Princeton for my undergraduate because I could get a really good education, but of course I could play some Ivy League school sports, which I did, including football. Varsity football, and also I ran track and field. They wanted me to play hockey too, but the seasons were a bit overlapped and I couldn't do all three sports.
So you managed through all of it to maintain enough eligibility to play quarterback at Queen's when you were at medical school.
Yeah, so I went to Princeton and I played what counted for 2 years of varsity football. But that left me 2 years of eligibility still to play in medical school. And so I did engineering at Princeton. I was a chemical engineer, and I loved Princeton. It was a great school, and made tremendous friends and colleagues there lifelong. But I was really interested in medicine, even out of high school. For some reason, I just had this desire, this penchant to go into medical school. So I kind of put all my eggs more or less in one basket, but I did have a backdrop. Like if I didn't get into medical school, I would do engineering. So I applied to the medical schools across Canada because I was interested in coming back to Canada. I got into Queen's University, which is in Kingston between Montreal and Toronto, and got accepted. And so I was really keen to embark on medical school. But as you had mentioned, I also was still interested in playing sports. So I actually played on the Queen's football team. And the second year that I played at Queen's, so my final year, we went on and we won the national championship across Canada. The Vanier Cup, it was called, that we won. And it was a great experience. And you know what? I would probably pit our team at Queen's against Princeton's team. And I think the Queen's team would come out on top. That's the way I'm looking at it now, anyway, in retrospect.
We'll take your word for it on that. It was at Queen's that you started thinking about neurosurgery?
Yeah, but not initially. I was interested, probably like you, Sunit. I was interested in internal medicine for a while. Rheumatology was actually interesting. Orthopedic surgery, cardiac surgery. But then I did an elective at, of all places, Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto in pediatric neurosurgery, because my brother, who's also in medicine, was a clinical clerk. So he's 2 years older, and he was doing a rotation there. He invited me to come down to see what it was all about. I must tell you, it was like a light switch went on, and I saw the work that my future mentors were doing at Sick Kids, and I thought, this is amazing stuff. What if I ever became a neurosurgeon first and foremost, and then maybe followed in the footsteps of some of my mentors like Harold Hoffman, Bruce Hendrick, and Robin Humphreys at Sick Kids Hospital.
Is that what drew you to the residency program here?
Well, in those days, we had to do internships. So I actually did internship at McGill in a combined medicine surgical program. And it was during that year that I made applications to programs for neurosurgery across the United States and Canada. And the two places I was really interested in, one was at UCSF and the other one was in Toronto. And so I applied to both, interviewed at both. Tough decision to just, make up your mind where you want to be. But I ultimately ended up choosing Toronto program and staying in Toronto for the start of my residency. But it was because of that very unique elective rotation I had at Sick Kids while I was a second year medical student. And I gravitated directly towards neurosurgery. It was like the lights went on, as I said, and there's nothing else that I wanted to do. And I'm sure that pivotal moment occurs to so many of us and medical students. And that's where we end up going. But it is curious how people choose different things at different times.
Well, that era that you spent training in Toronto, I think of the giants who were present there. Were there people who kind of gravitated toward as mentors?
Yeah, so when I applied to the program, Alan Hudson was the chair of neurosurgery at that time. He was a very phenomenal peripheral nerve surgeon. He and Dave Klein wrote all the textbooks on peripheral nerve surgery. So during my residency with Dr. Hudson, man, I operated on dozens and dozens of brachial nerve, brachial plexus lesions, and became very familiar with the surgery of peripheral nerve operations. And he was an amazing technical, old school, but amazing fast surgeon who did everything from microsurgery all the way through to the brachial plexus surgery, as mentioned. And he was a very good administrator as well. He did the chair of neurosurgery position for the 10 years that was allotted to him, but then he went into hospital administration and eventually became the CEO of one of the biggest university complexes, University Health Network at the University of Toronto, and did a fabulous job in that role. And I look at him as one of my mentors. And then about midway through my residency, Charles Tatter became chair. And so I learned a lot from Charles, and he was a true academic clinical neurosurgeon. So he had a lab that he had run since he had started his practice. And his interests gravitated towards the spinal cord injury world. Initially, he started in brain tumors, but then he was studying spinal cord injury. And so he taught me a lot about how to combine a career in basic science and in surgery. But it was Alan Hudson's idea ultimately to get me interested in brain tumor research during my residency, because he recognized the need for having individuals at the University of Toronto invested in a career path in tumors, because we have 4 major hospitals, each one's the size of some programs in the United States, and the overall tumor burden is huge compared to many other cities. And nothing was being done with the tumors. And patients were getting radiation therapy and surgery, and that was about it. And so he thought there was a great need for individuals to learn fundamental research in brain tumors. So he encouraged me to go to San Francisco, and it happened to be that's where Mark Bernstein was already at UCSF. So Mark and I, we didn't overlap, but we dovetailed with our careers. He went and came back, and then I went down and did my PhD at UCSF in their significant brain tumor research center at that time, that was organized by and headed by Charles Wilson.
Mm-hmm. So that really, it sounds like, was the foundation for moving forward as a clinician scientist, that training that you had with Mark Rosenblum and the group at UCSF.
Yeah, so Mark was one of the principal investigators, along with individuals like Phil Gutin, Mike Edwards, Dennis Dean, John Fike, a bunch that were there. I worked in Mark's lab. He was interested in studying stem cells at that time, like way ahead of the curve in a way. He had an assay that he espoused, which was the clonogenic stem cell assay. And I learned how to do a basic science research in Mark Rosenblum's lab. And I got my PhD there. And that set the stage for me to come back to Toronto, finish my residency, and then embark on my career in neurosurgery. But prior to that, there was kind of a year gap phase where I was, advised to do a clinical fellowship. So I went to Japan and did a fellowship, and that was way before anybody from North America would go to Japan. As you probably know, so many countries send their trainees to North America, but I was probably one of the first North Americans to go and train specifically in Japan. I had the great privilege of training with Dr. Sugita, famous for his aneurysm clips, but also the instrumentation that he has in the operating room, and learned the Sugita system, which I carry with me to this day in the operating room.
And when, so what year is this that you come back to Toronto? This is...
Yeah, so I finished PhD 87, and then I finished my residency, took my exams in Canada, and then started my neurosurgery practice in 1990 at Sick Kids Hospital.
And back to Sick Kids, kind of where it all started.
Yeah, amazing. Like when I think back on it, it's just like unimaginable dream come true.
Yeah.
And ended up here. And when I landed, the three mentors I mentioned at the beginning, so Hendrik, Hoffman, Humphreys, they were still here, and they served to get me up and going in my clinical practice in neurosurgery at the Children's Hospital.
Yes. So Jim, I think about this remarkable research center that I have lived my career in, the BTRC, the Brain Tumor Research Center. But that was just an idea in your mind when you came back to Toronto, right? And I'm guessing something influenced by what you saw in San Francisco, but maybe you can tell me a little bit about kind of what prompted you to start the work here and how you saw that evolve.
Yeah, so Charlie Wilson's program and the center there was, top in the world, first of its kind to a degree. And so I thought, boy, what if we could emulate something like that in Toronto? And knowing that we'd have to start small, which we did. So I mentioned Mark Bernstein's name. He was a part of this, myself. Ab Guha, who had also done some fundamental research work in Boston before coming back to Toronto after his residency. He worked with Chuck Stiles there. And essentially the three of us had this notion of establishing a brain tumor center, which we ended up doing and bringing people together, but we missed like a catalyst. What we really needed was some funding to kind of glue us together. And thankfully, about 5 to 7 years after I landed at Sick Kids Hospital, very influential family in Toronto, the Labatt family, made a generous donation to our cause in the research center. So they gave us a multi-million-dollar grant, if you will, to start up the Brain Tumor Center, which we did. The center was established at Sick Kids, and I started my research lab, which was evolving, and Ab and Mark brought their labs together with us, and then it's just started snowballing after that. But when I first started doing research, even before the center was established, it was myself and the bench, and there was nobody else. And I was doing clinical neurosurgery. I was writing my, grants. I was writing papers, and when I look back on it, it was hard. Like, it was really hard to do that, almost in isolation. But then I got very fortunate. I got my first grant. I could hire my first postdoc, which happened to be a Japanese postdoc. And because of my connections in Japan over the years, I've had almost an endless stream of very capable Japanese postdocs who have worked in my laboratory. The research center started in 1997. And if you fast forward to today, so almost 25 years later, I think we're the largest brain tumor research center of its kind in the world. We have over 120 people working in the center, multiple principal investigators, of which you are one in your lab. And then, of course, individuals like Peter Dirks and Michael Taylor, whose names are like household names now for the types of fundamental research work that they do as neurosurgeon scientists. My laboratory, we have oncologists within our midst. We have a neuropathologist. And yeah, as I said, it's just been a dream come true when I think about it. The Labatt family gave again about 5 years after they made their initial donation. So they made us another significant gift, which is now swelled to the point where we have an enormous endowment fund that helps float pilot projects, seed grants, infrastructure, maintenance contracts on equipment, and all these things which take place each year, thanks to the Labatt family. So yeah, it all came together, and now, as I look on it, humble beginnings, but we're now probably the largest center of its kind in the world.
Yeah. So Jim, it wasn't so long after you set up the BTRC that you were tapped to become the chair of neurosurgery.
Yeah, so it was 1999, and I can remember the day that Alan Hudson interviewed me when he was chair of neurosurgery for the position of resident in the program. And I was very impressed with Dr. Hudson. I thought, if I could ever be a chair, I would be, so happy a person, and something I strive to do. So, but you know what, Sunit, I just kept my nose down. I worked hard all those years. And when Charles was chair after Dr. Hudson, Charles Tatter's term ended, and then there was applications for the chair position. I applied for it, and it was then entitled the Dan Family Chair in neurosurgery. And I was very lucky to get the chair position in 1999, so 9 years after I started my practice. And I held that for about 11 years. And one of the goals I had as chair of neurosurgery in Toronto was to try to make Toronto a magnet for neurosurgery dignitaries to come and visit us, to see what we were all about, and to try to shine a light on our program in Toronto, because that was a kind of a guarded secret. Not many people knew about the wealth of clinical material, the unbelievable research that goes on in Toronto, the great number, as you know, of surgeon scientists like yourself who are working with us. And I wanted to bring that to the attention of especially our American colleagues, which I really tried hard to do.
What, if you look back at that time, what do you remember kind of most fondly, and what do you think to yourself, I wish this had gone further?
So I always enjoyed resident education. So I would have to say that trying to select for the best and brightest residents was something I worked really hard to do, along with my program director at the time, was Chris Wallace. So Chris and I were really close in terms of our professional aspirations, in terms of the program, but also our friendship. And it was, I think, one of the best things was working with Chris Wallace to build the Toronto program, to make it as strong as it could be in the residency program, and then to make sure that all aspects of the faculty's career development and their opportunities to advance in their own careers, and the residents too, to make sure that they graduated with distinction and went on to either fellowships or to jobs at the highest level, was something that Chris and I really worked hard to do. And I think we were successful, by and large, for the most part.
So the next, I think, big step for you was to make this remarkable transition to then be the chair of surgery. And I should make the note for our listeners that in Toronto, neurosurgery is one of the divisions within the Department of Surgery. But to be the chair of surgery means that you're leading not only the group of neurosurgeons, but also plastic surgeons, orthopedic surgeons, cardiac surgeons. It's a massive and diverse group. You talk about Dr. Hudson and the fact that he moved on to a CEO role, but in a way, this was a very similar transition. I mean, it really is beyond the world that we're kind of accustomed to living in. Yeah.
Yeah, so imagine if you had to look after the welfare of cardiac surgery, orthopedics, urology, vascular, plastics, and that's what I did for the last 11 years. And over 350 faculty, over 300 residents, over 250 fellows. It's a massive program and enterprise. Obviously I didn't get down into the details of every single division within surgery and their faculty members, but I must say I got to know just about everybody in the faculty, and I was very interested in their career development, and I took the job extremely seriously and tried my best to build up each of the programs so that the Department of Surgery then could be recognized across all departments in the world. And if we fast forward until just the last couple of years after I finished as chair now, and I look at our rankings worldwide. I mean, we were just recently ranked by the US News and World Report as third in the world for entire departments of surgery. I'm really pleased about that ranking and status. We have these terms in these leadership positions in Toronto. I actually think it's a good idea. 10 years, which I did both. I did 11 years for neurosurgery and 11 years for the Department of Surgery. You could argue it's a little bit short, but I think 20 years is probably too long. So somewhere maybe in between might be good, but I actually enjoyed, and I think it's a good idea to hand it over at a time point when somebody else enthusiastic with a lot of great ideas can come on board and pick up the position. I should also mention that during that time point, I was very involved in organized neurosurgery too. So ever since my practice started, I became involved in the tumor section, between AANS and CNS. Of course, the AANS, I was the head of the tumor section, but then I was very fortunate to become a secretary, first board of directors, and then secretary of the organization, that then led to vice president and president-elect, and then president. In 2011, my meeting was in Denver, and going up that ladder, Sunit, was amazing. I really enjoyed that opportunity to work with the AANS as a great organization, and to lead it for a year was a phenomenal experience. That I must say was one of the highlights of my entire career, is serving as the president of the AANS and all that entailed. But it was busy. It was a busy year, and I was just starting at that time my Department of Surgery job. So yeah, there was a lot on my plate, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, Jim, we're finally giving you a little bit of a break.
Yes, thank you.
So what's next?
Yeah, thanks. And so, since the job as Department Surgery Chair is just fresh, and it's completed now, July 1st. To be honest, I'm taking a couple of steps back, and I'm looking at the horizon and seeing what else is out there, thinking about other possibilities of things I would like to do above and beyond what I've done already. So I've done a couple of chair positions. I've served as president of several of our organizations, and I'm not sure I need to do any more of that. But yeah, I mean, I think I would keep my eyes wide open for an interesting academic job if it became available, for, let's say, as a dean, or possibly CEO or something like that elsewhere. I still, however, really like doing neurosurgery. And I'm not sure I'm ready to give up neurosurgery yet. I think with those jobs, you actually need to step away from your clinical practice. And I have maybe a 5-year horizon for that. But I'll keep my eyes open, as mentioned, for anything else that might come my way, and be so fortunate to look at and perhaps assume after this. But there are other things that one has to consider as you go through your professional career, and recognizing that nothing is permanent, nothing lasts forever, and certainly looking at other ways to enjoy myself at this stage in my career, having done all those very rewarding and worthwhile endeavors, as mentioned during this interview. There are some things I still like to do outside of neurosurgery that I'm looking forward to as well, including, my wife, Mari, and I had a wonderful time about 5 years ago constructing a cottage for ourselves up north in northern Ontario. And we like to get there as much as we can these days to just be far away from, the Toronto scene. And we're right on the water. We like to do a lot of outdoor activities, from the hiking, canoeing, kayaking, paddleboarding, lots of things that we can do up there. Lots of projects to do on a cottage, as you can imagine. So I've been doing some plumbing, some electrician work, some outdoor, laying down patio stones. They're just doing things that are totally separate from neurosurgery, but really enjoying the diversity and getting out of your usual comfort zone and doing things that you have to read about or learn on YouTube to do effectively. So there's that. We love to travel. We've been very fortunate to travel around the world, Mari and I, and we hope to do more travel. We have a trip to Israel in September as an example, which we're looking forward to in Jerusalem. I play music. I'm not sure you knew that, but I do play piano, and I'm actually finding now I'm getting to the keyboard more often than I could before I stepped away from the chair position. And then our children are on the West Coast, and we really love to visit them when possible. They're going to visit us at the cottage this summer, but they live in Vancouver and in Los Angeles. During the pandemic, it was hard. We couldn't see them as often, but now that the pandemic we're emerging from it, we're probably hoping to see them more frequently. So those are just some ideas. And reading books. You and I, we have a passion for books. So I've been just reading for myself these days. I didn't mention, but obviously folks may know that I'm still editor-in-chief of the Journal of Neurosurgery. So I do my share of reading still within neurosurgery and making decisions for authors who have submitted their works to the journal.
Well, Jim, I hope, I have no doubt that you'll keep yourself busy, and I hope you find as much joy in the many years to come as you've clearly found in the many years past. But I'll say in conclusion, it's been great to hear more of your story. It's been a tremendous honor of mine to be a mentee of yours here at U of T, and a great source of pleasure to be a friend. And I wish you, Mari, and your kids all the best with everything coming for you. And I hope that if the opportunity to pursue something else in academia arises for you, it's in Toronto, because we don't want you to leave.
Well, thank you, Sunit. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you. Thanks for the questions, and it's been a pleasure watching you and your career grow and thrive. So wishing you all the best as well.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay. See you.